In the world where the protagonist lived, there were so-called human cards. The entire floor around him was stained with blood, and the only thing the man cared about was how such a thing could happen to him. His hands were also stained with blood. Seeing someone's feet in front of him, the guy thought to himself that they weren't human. Terrifying dark male silhouettes bent over their victim. At that moment, the unknown victim thought they were real demons. Human maps existed in this world, but they were also called prison maps. Simply put, you could lock a person in these cards like a prison. It could be someone you hated, someone you adored, or even an artist of anyone you wanted to make your own. One of these cards sealed a guy named Ios Mamoru. One day the main character was walking down the street and kept clicking on his tablet screen. He had headphones in his ears, so the guy was alert when someone's hand behind him stopped him. As soon as the hero took off his headphones, he heard the loud sounds of cars passing by. He didn't even notice as he almost stepped out into the road. The hero turned around at the man who stopped him. It was a young guy named Riku, who looked sternly at his buddy. He frowned and thought that his friend Mamoru had had enough of life. Riku was sure that Mamoru was playing his online game again and didn't notice anything around him. And he was right. Riku told his friend that he was a pretty smart guy, but once he got caught up in the game, he didn't see anything around him and had to do something about it. Mamoru told Riku that he was, as usual, taking care of everyone but himself, and maybe he should think about himself. Riku frowned and asked Mamoru about it. Mamoru meant that his friend should have finally confessed his feelings to Yuka. Hearing that, Riku grabbed his head fearfully. He called Mamoru a fool and was clearly angry. Mamoru realized that Riku wouldn't say anything to her. After all, they were always childhood friends even in university and always the three of them, so he didn't know what to do. The hero assumed that he would tell her after all, and Riku didn't deny that he would definitely do it someday. Riku frowned and reminded him that now was not the right time to do it. Yuki's father went missing 3 weeks ago. Even though they filed a police report, there was still no information. It seemed to Riku that Yuka was close to giving up, though she wouldn't show it in front of them. It was hard for him to see Yuka like this. Mamoru decided to ask his friend what he would say to him about finding her father. Riku turned his head and noticed the Yaku on the opposite side of the road. Yuka looked at the phone with a smile, but then sadly held it to her chest. She also turned her head and spotted Rika. The girl ran towards him and Riku also ran towards her right on the road. After a while, the heroes reached a building where Mamoru was looking for something in his laptop. Yuka asked what he was doing, and Mamoru decided to show something to his friends. He asked the guys if they knew anything about human maps. Riku hadn't heard anything about it and assumed it was some new game. Yuki apologized and admitted that she had never heard of it either. Mamoru picked up one of the cards and said that they were human cards, also called prison cards. The front side of such cards had a pattern on it, but the back side, as could be seen, had nothing on it. The thickness of the cards was 2 millimeters and they were made of paper. Human cards are a legend roaming the vastness of the darknet, but it was not an easy card. It held fantastic power. There was something that could be done with these cards. More specifically, a real person could be imprisoned inside the card. Mamoru said this in all seriousness, but his friends only looked at him in surprise. There was silence for a while. At first, Yuki and Riku stared at their friend, but then they grabbed their heads and laughed. The girl couldn't contain her laughter and apologized for it. It's just that Mamoru was telling all this with a rather serious face. Riku also looked at his friend and asked where he dug up such information. Now Yuki stopped laughing the second Mamoru said that he found that information from her father. This time, the friends were truly shocked, and Mamoru clarified that he found out it from her father's laptop that she lent him. Mamoru used it to try to find any clue. He'd noticed that Yuki's father had been frequenting the same site, according to his browser history, several times a day, almost every 5 minutes, and that was shortly before he disappeared. Mamoru clicked on the touchpad and went to that site. It was an official human map site. But in reality the site was just a picture and required a key to enter, which there was no mention of. But Yuki's father had the key, so Mamoru desperately searched for a way to get it, and finally he managed to get that key. The key was actually an account. It was like a letter of invitation to the world of human cards, and by obtaining it, a person was entitled to buy a card. Riku didn't understand what his friend was saying, but Mamoru interrupted him. He smiled and said that after becoming a user, he was finally able to enter the site. and that piqued his interest. It was like another reality, and once he touched it, he wanted to know more and more. Mamoru was drawn in by it, and he was beginning to think it was all true. Riku refused to believe it, but Mamoru repeated that it was true. As for the case of the 3 strangled girls whose remains were found today, the accused was cleared of all charges. It was shown all over the news, and even though the camera captured the suspect with the victims shortly before their disappearance, the image was not clear enough, and the suspect changed his statement and began to deny guilt. Therefore, due to insufficient evidence, all charges were dropped. Mamoru had an irresistible desire to try the cards, and it was a desire he could never overcome. He wondered if it was really possible to conclude with the man in these cards. For this purpose, Mamoru chose a certain person. It was a man named Pseudo Toru. This is the man who was suspected of killing those girls. In their time, with the help of the internet, anything could be found out. A week after the charges were dropped, Mamoru began to watch him. After watching the news, his premonition only grew stronger. The hero had no doubt that he would definitely commit a crime again, so he wanted to erase him from their society. The website had prescribed conditions under which it was possible to lock the man in the map, and this condition was a human weakness. In order to seal the desired object, it was necessary to present him with his weakness, thus taking control of him. Then one must utter something that would serve as a trigger and the person would be sealed. Mamoru felt that if that was indeed the case, then it was as simple as that. The hero believed that telling him that he was a murderer was enough. The only problem was the location, and one had to try to hide from people's eyes. Suddenly Pseudo Toru stopped and Mamoru hid behind the corner of the building. The guy wasn't interested in the reason why he stopped. It was possible that this was Mamoru's chance, but for whatever reason he didn't dare to attack. He remembered that the website also wrote that the opponent's weakness depended on his values, and perhaps his weakness was not that he was a criminal. The hands in which the hero held the cards trembled. He wondered if they really had that power in them. Mamoru decided that it wouldn't work that way, since he couldn't even move. But suddenly there was someone else who dared and called Pseudo Toru's name. The stranger stood right in front of the suspect and told him that he had been caught up in a case of killing girls. The young guy wanted to know if he was really the killer. Toru wondered who he was and what evidence he had to prove it. Mamoru covered his mouth in fear and thought that it really didn't reach his weakness. Meanwhile, the unknown person showed the image of the 2 girls in the picture to Toru Pseudo. The one on the left in the picture was his older sister, and she was 10 when she fell out of the window of their apartment and crashed to death. And those 3 girls had something in common with his sister. Pseudo Toru insulted the guy without realizing what he was babbling about. His statement made the suspected murderer very angry. But the stranger made a shocked statement that Toru was in love with his own sister, and so now he kept looking for her image in the crowd. Toru grabbed his head and thought that those 3 looked a lot like her, and that was what attracted him to them. Pseudo Toru clearly remembered his sister's face the moment she fell from the window before she died. He became enraged and began shouting for proof. Toru wanted proof of his actions, and the stranger pulled out a prison map. He was sure that this was the case. Mamoru was shocked when he saw the stranger had the exact same map. The blonde-haired guy threw the card at the man and said that this was exactly what his weakness was. Toru looked at the card in front of him in surprise, and the stranger activated the prison card. At the same moment, the card glowed and began to draw Pseudo Toru into itself. The man did not understand how this was possible and tried to resist. Toru did not understand how this was possible, for his body was sucked into the card, after which he completely dissolved into it. The map fell to the ground, whereupon the stranger walked over and picked it up. At last he said that he did not need proof to send him to prison. This was the very purpose for which human maps existed. The stranger looked at the card, which had all the data on age, blood type, height and weight of the Pseudo Toru. It was as if the stranger sensed that he was being watched and looked back towards the protagonist with a smile. Then he simply disappeared from sight. Mamoru told the story to the guys and admitted that he didn't get a good look at the man's face, but he saw it all with his own eyes, which made Yuki and Riku shocked. The hero saw the moments when a person is sucked inside the card. It was definitely not a dream or some kind of vision. Human maps definitely existed somewhere between their worlds. Yuki took a couple steps toward Mamoru and suggested that it might be true. In that case, her father could have gotten into that map. The hero stunned the boys with the news that this was the case. He took the map in his hands, pointed to it, and said that Yuki's father was inside such a map. Thus the door to darkness was opened and there was no turning back. Rumors of human cards spread everywhere, but only a select few knew the real truth. It was said that there were such maps, in which, as in a prison, you could lock up a man if you knew his weak spot. People didn't believe it, but thought they were devil cards. In one of the cafes in town, there was a lot of noise. Someone called out to the Mido and asked him to bring a dish to table 7 as soon as possible. The waiter understood and served the dish for table 11. It was veal saltimbocca, and for dessert there was tiramisu and cheesecake. The customer also had something to ask the already busy man. The young fellow waiter politely asked the cook to make the arabatsu not too spicy. The cook pulled a smile on his face and said he understood. The second cook noticed that his colleague was laughing for some reason, but the man said it was okay. It was just that he thought the customer at table 11 had recently complained about the spiciness. Mido, as I have always been great at memorizing visitors, he suggested that he should have dropped out of university and stayed here to work, although it was difficult in such a small Italian eatery. The cook overheard his coworker say something about their restaurant, but the cook kept quiet. To a diligent student like Mido, no such thing would be offered, and someone like him would succeed in anything. The waiter served the customer a dish called pescator and apologized for the wait. The visitor wanted to say something to the waiter and Mido stopped. The visitor admitted that he had been eyeing him for a while, and Mido served the guest very kindly. He was always kind and accommodating, and because of this, the guests could enjoy his meal in a good mood. Mido blushed with embarrassment and sincerely thanked the visitor for the praise. The visitor smiled slyly and started eating. He pierced the large shrimp he had on his plate with his fork. The guy apologized for leaving his shift early, but the cook said it was fine and told him not to worry about it. Mido had an important test tomorrow, so the guys wanted him to go home and study hard for it. Mido smiled and said goodbye to the cooks until tomorrow. The second cook turned out to be the principal, and his coworker suggested that he was putting too much work on Mido's plate. It had to be remembered that he was a student, but Mido had asked him to do it himself. He said he didn't want to sit on his mother's neck and was paying for university on his own. Such good children were rare in their time. Meanwhile, Mido got to Shinjuku Station, which was quite crowded, and got on the subway. He got to Kabuki-T, where he got off the subway and headed along through the evening streets of the city. In addition to his work, Mido had time to play badminton. In one of the games, the match was behind him and Mido decided to take a rest. While he was drinking water, a girl approached him and called out Mido-senpai. But Mido smiled and asked to just call him by his first name. The girl blushed and looked away. She embarrassedly suggested Mido to have dinner together. Mido apologized and said that he had a part-time job late tonight, so if it wasn't a problem, he would like to decline. The girl agreed and replied that she would wait for his call. While Mido was walking down the street, staring at his phone, a strong wind blew in his direction and the guy covered himself with his hand. He noticed that a certain man in a black business suit was looking at him nearby. This mysterious man knew the name Mido Naoto Kuna. The male silhouette smiled and told Mido about his mother's condition. That man knew that Mido's matter condition wasn't getting better, and judging from the boy's reaction, he was right. Mido didn't understand who was standing in front of him and what they wanted. The man told the guy that Mido was a law student at East Central University and a member of the badminton club. Despite being busy with a part-time job at an Italian restaurant, he continued to show amazing grades and attendance. He also started dating a girl a year younger than him 3 months ago. Mido was shocked, not realizing how this man knew so much about him. But the man was not interested. The guy was not addicted to alcohol or cigarettes, and for the sake of success in the club carefully watched his diet. But he did not use any steroids to build muscles. Most importantly, he had youth, and that seemed fine to the man. With these words, the man pulled a prison card from his pocket. The man took the map in his hands and said that Mido was a true ideal. Also, the stranger recalled that Mido had only one parent. His mother tried her best to get him into university and dealt with money matters as well. Apparently, she had a very difficult time. Mido was a compassionate and caring boy who probably understood her perfectly, so he decided to share her suffering and work hard to avoid being a burden to her. But misfortune overtook them when his mother came down with a serious illness. Mido didn't understand what this stranger wanted to say, for he appeared as if out of nowhere and would not shut up in any way. He wanted to end it all, and the man said that was fine. True, with just his part-time job alone. It was still hard when you think of his mother's medical bills. The stranger pulled out many pictures and threw them in front of the young man's feet, which shocked Mido. These photos showed the boy going around with strange men and selling himself. 3 times a month Mido went out with men. Of course, he realized that in his situation he needed money, but his girlfriend could have found out about it. Plus, his mother could find out about it and Mito wrapped his arms around himself in terror. He asked the man to stop. The man smirked and suggested that it wasn't just about the money. Mito wept and shouted that he dare not say such a thing to them. The stranger was well aware of Mito's weakness and threw the prison card at him, then used the activation. Before the guy realized what was happening, his body was encased in the card. The card with the Mito Naoto fell to the ground in front of the man. The man picked up his card, shook it off, and put it back in his pocket. As if nothing had happened, he headed onward. In this way, people continued to disappear in the city as well. Just one piece of paper was capable of destroying a man's life, and he learned of the existence of these maps. Mamoru claimed that Yuki's father was imprisoned in one of these maps. Riku wanted to know how Mamoru found out, and the girl looked at their friend with interest. Mamoru silently held the card in his hands and Riku once again called out to him. The guy replied that he had proof and it was on this website. With those words, he entered the password in the laptop. The proof was this page, which had all the information about people. All three of them scrutinized the cards where the characteristics of the people were spelled out. There was also a price on these cards and Mamoru told the guys that it was an auction. Riku asked about it again and Mamoru said that the Human Cards website has auctions all the time. Unusual goods were put up here, and the goods on this site were humans. That is, there were people here who had been turned into a map. If you look at the data of one of the cards, it had the name Eyes Gyro in it. Mamoru wanted to make sure that was the name of Yuki's father. Yuki was shocked by this news and froze in place. Not only the name, but all the characteristics such as age and profession matched. It was as if Yuki's father had been imprisoned by someone in this card and his card was being auctioned off. Yuki clutched her head in horror. Riku wanted to say something to his friend, but Mamoru interrupted him. The guy thought that no matter what, they shouldn't have despaired, and they were very lucky that his card was up for auction. But that wasn't what Riku meant at all. If whoever had captured Yuki's father had kept his map, there was no way they would have been able to find it. The auction was their point of contact. The thing is, the auction site had the name of a man who managed to acquire the map of Yuki's father. His name, or rather his nickname, was Sekators. It was unknown to Mamoru why this person wanted the Yuki father card, but if he still had it, it was all pretty simple. Mamoru was going to make a deal with him and buy back the map. He had already used the site's internal chat and sent the Sekator a request for a deal on the auction. His father's card was sold for 240,000 yen, and he offered him 300,000. All he had to do was wait for a response. Mamoru tried to tell Yuka that this way they could get it back, but Yuka asked him to stop. The girl burst into tears and asked him to stop. She didn't understand how or why Mamoru could say such a thing. She wanted to stop the guy, because suddenly he was claiming that her father was imprisoned in the map and she couldn't believe it. Mamoru wanted to prove that it was true and wanted his card back, but Riku stopped his friend. Riku asked him to chill out and admitted that anyone would doubt such a story. Besides, Mamoru has never been good at sensing a situation. However, Riku realized that his friend wasn't the kind of person who would lie, and Yuka probably thought the same. Sure, it sounded like a lie from the outside, but it was their only lead so far. Riku turned to Yuka, who still couldn't hold back her tears. Mamoru was surprised at the words of Riku, who wanted to help him in any way. Mamoru smiled slightly and thanked his friend for trusting him. In that case, the guys should have become users on this site to begin with. Riku didn't understand why they had to become users like that. The hero explained that they needed to become with human card users. If they went to this site, it would seem like it was just an online store, but the main page was just a cover. On the registration page, they had to enter their information and write human cards in the name column. After a while, they would get a reply email, and if you answered the email, they would pass the verification. After that, they will finally get an account on the Human Cards website, and the verification was the hardest part. But if they do everything as Mamoru said, the guys won't have any problem with it. Yuki said goodbye to Mamoru and Riku, and left. Mamoru noticed that Yuka had finally perked up. Riku sat down with Mamoru on the bench and thought about what was happening to this world. It was really hard for him to believe that something like this really existed. But Mamoru confirmed it. Riku thought about the weakness that made it possible to seal a person into a map. Riku didn't know if there was a connection here, but recently several people from his university had gone missing. Among them was a guy named Mito, who had promised to lend his lectures to Riku. He hadn't shown up at the university in a long time, which alerted Mamoru. Riku smiled and said that if he could help Yuka, that was enough for him and he would do his best. Riku got ready to leave since he had a part-time job and Mamoru agreed with him. Before leaving, Riku asked the guy to text him right away if he heard anything. He also asked Mamoru not to stay out late and left. Mamoru looked after Riku. He knew his friend would say that and it was easy to understand him. That was why he gathered his strength and told them everything. If you tell them about the human cards, they will definitely enter the game. Yuka for his father's sake, and Riku for Yuka's sake. Mamoru, on the other hand, had it differently. Mamoru was captivated and fascinated by the obscurity of human cards. Suddenly, a call rang on Mamoru's phone, which scared the guy a lot. The notification was so unexpected that the hero almost dropped the phone from his hands. It was a message from the prisoner who greeted the hero. Mamoru was so excited that he stared at the screen and only waited for the secateurs to reply after the greeting. His gaze changed and he thought with horror that it just couldn't be. The next day, Mamoru's friends asked if the man had answered him. The hero lied and said that no one had answered him yet. Mamoru looked rather gloomy and put his head down in his rice bowl. It all became clear to Riku. He replied that it made him a little nervous, and Mamoru called out to his friend that sat down next to him. The hero wanted to ask the guy purely theoretically. He speculated that they might need a map of a young girl around their age and wanted to know Riku's opinion on the matter. Riku didn't understand what his friend meant and said he was asking some weird questions again. When talking about a young girl, Yuka immediately comes to mind, but he didn't want to even think about putting her on the map. But on second thought, for the sake of saving her father, she probably would have agreed without even hesitating. Riku didn't understand what Mamoru was driving at, but the hero put the sticks on the rice bowl and said it was just for fun. Mamoru took a seat at a desk in the auditorium where he took out his phone again. As for the transaction, the secateurs were not interested in money. His condition was in exchange for the card of a young girl in her 20s, and nothing else satisfied him. He was counting on Mamoru's understanding and their cooperation. The hero realized that he had miscalculated and assumed that the secateurs would just raise the price, but he did not expect such a thing. Mamoru was also struck by how the man cold-bloodedly demanded the map from him. The guy wondered where he could get a map of a 20-year-old girl. Surely the secateurs must have wanted him to lock the young girl up with his hands. Mamoru wasn't sure he was capable of daring to do something like that. While he was thinking about it, someone called out to him and the guy looked up. It was a young long-haired girl who wanted to clarify that the place wasn't busy. Mamoru smiled and let her sit down next to him. Taking a seat, the girl said that the weather had been a real nightmare lately and everyone was literally blown away. Mamoru stared at his phone again and then at the girl. Suddenly a thought popped into his head. He remembered that he had accidentally seen this girl with the professor once. This girl was dating a 44-year-old professor who had a wife and children. Mamoru realized that because of this, he knew the weakness of the girl named Matsunaga Miyuki. After class, the hero purposefully followed the girl. Miyuki stopped in front of the building as if waiting for someone and smilingly looked at her phone. The hero had no idea that he would be so lucky to be reminded of her relationship and decided he was lucky. But suddenly something stopped Mamoru. He couldn't realize what he was doing, because he was about to imprison a young girl in the map just like the others. But Miyuki was a girl in her 20s, and he knew her weakness. And to get Yuki's father back, a card for exchange was needed and the conditions for that were just perfect. The hero thought that everything would work out if he could get hold of their picture. Mamoru cautiously peeked out from around the corner and saw a 44-year-old professor with a girl running up to him. They met and headed somewhere while holding each other's hands. Miyuki laughed and told the professor that they had bought quite a lot of stuff and they would eat today. Miyuki looked at the professor hopefully and suggested that they could do everything without rushing today. The man smiled and agreed with his young chosen one. The girl rejoiced and the professor asked her to be careful on the steps. They didn't even notice Mamoru standing in front of them and took a picture of them. The hero gave them a look and thought he was very lucky. He captured the moment of their kiss and decided he had to do it. The next day, Miyuki was sitting in the classroom when suddenly she received a notification. The girl picked up her phone in her hands. It was a message from the main character. Mamoru said that they needed to talk. He didn't want anyone to hear them, so he suggested they meet at 4 o'clock in the evening behind the second building. Mamoru kept his prison card at the ready and mentally apologized to Miyuki. He was sure it was just for the sake of the deal, and that he hadn't done anything wrong. Mamoru hoped that he would definitely get her card back, and when this was over, he would explain everything to her. Right now, however, she had to become a necessary victim. It was as if Mamoru had lost his mind and decided that she would definitely understand him. While waiting for Miyuki, the guy laughed, but to his surprise he was met by someone else. It was Riku, who noticed the map in the guy's hands and decided he was absolutely right. Riku told Mamoru that he had sent Miyuki home and headed towards his friend. He grabbed the guy's clothes, trying to figure out what Mamoru was doing. Riku yelled that once he got carried away with something, he didn't pay attention to anything else. Mamoru fell to his knees and apologized to Riku. The hero was embarrassed and thought that it always ended up like this. This was the only person capable of getting him back on the right path. Riku leaned over to his friend and admitted that he had been a little harsh with him. But seeing yesterday's Mamoru, anyone would realize that there was something wrong here. It was pretty easy for the hero to understand what annoyed Mamoru. The guy thought and told Riku that he wouldn't use this card for a deal, and would have to come up with another plan. The hero decided that he would use it to seal the secateurs. The hero had a cup of tea, looked at the time and told Riku that it was time for them to start. Riku corrected his earpiece and made sure everything was ready. Mamoru replied that the secateurs were close and they should proceed as planned. Next to Riku was Yuki. Riku looked up at the windows of the building where the hero was watching them and raised a finger up. He let Mamoru know that they had everything perfect and the hero thought it was great. 2 days ago, the guys went into a love hotel, which embarrassed Yuki a lot. She flushed and pounced on the guys, asking what they forgot at the love hotel. Riku flushed and didn't know how to tell her, but Mamoru decided to act on his own. He showed the girl his phone and told her that this was the secateurs deal place he was talking about and they came here to look around. It seems he chose this place so that no one would be embarrassed that the room was rented for a short time. It was a common thing in love hotels, and in order not to attract attention, it was better to come along with the girl. So he asked Yuku for help. Yuka was too embarrassed. She frowned but remained silent. Then she turned away from the guys and said that apparently she had no other choice. Mamoru thanked her for her help and offered to discuss their plan in that case. There were only 2 days left until the secateurs deal. The meeting place on the appointed day was the Kabuki Tea. As the hero had already said, the time was 4 in the evening. Mamoru was to go along with the Yauka. Riku was to wait in a cafe on the 2nd floor of the building across the street. In order for Riku to keep an eye on the situation, they would keep in contact with him. If they used Bluetooth headset micro earphones, they could even talk to each other. At the appointed time, a man with a briefcase should come to the meeting place. He was the secateurs, and together they were to head to this love hotel. Mamoru, Yuka, and the secateurs, the 3 of them, would enter the room. After that, Yuka will immediately leave it, but instead of heading towards the exit, Mamoru wanted Yuka to go into the adjoining bathroom. Yuka didn't understand why she needed to go into the bathroom specifically, but then the girl realized everything and saw that there was a magic mirror. On the other side of the mirror, she saw Rika and Mamoru. Mamoru said that all the baths in this hotel had something like this. He wanted her to observe the situation from there. When she and secateurs are alone together, they will proceed with the exchange. Yuka asked to wait for a while and admitted that Riku had told her everything. In exchange, the secateurs wanted the card of a 20-year-old girl, and Yuka thought that Mamoru had locked someone inside her. But Mamoru assured her that it wasn't true and they weren't going to imprison anyone in the map. It turned out to be the case that on the appointed day, Mamoru would not have the right card with him to exchange. The hero kneeled down and lowered his head. He smiled and told the Yauka that he would just apologize. Earlier, Mamoru noticed something. He saw a scene of one of the men trying to shake money out of the other. It looked like he had been promised money back earlier, but now the man was saying that he had nothing. And if Mamoru didn't have the card, then deviating from the plan would be to their advantage. The fact that the hero came to the negotiation without having the very object of the deal with him was supposed to be his weakness. Mamoru believed that the secateurs were fully immersed in the world of human cards, and he probably always carries a blank card with him. The hero will start desperately begging him not to do that and say that it's his father. And to further anger his opponent, you could start clinging to his legs. Mamoru approved of Riku's idea and said it was good. The secateurs will probably lose their temper, at which point an idea will pop into his head. He will decide that the hero has a weakness, in which case he can imprison him in the map. Yuki was terrified that Mamoru would specifically prepare for imprisonment in the map, and if that happened, everything would come to an end. But the hero smiled and assured her that everything was fine, for at that moment it would be her turn. With these words, the hero pointed her to the mirror. She would watch the whole event from the bathroom from beginning to end. And, of course, the moments when he would be locked in the cart. There was one taboo in the world of human maps. One must not let anyone see the moment when he locked someone in the cart, because it would become his weakness. The hero handed the card to the girl and told her that after he was dragged into the card, she would have to stand in front of the secateurs. She will have to hold up a card in front of him and say something. Yuka would have to say that she saw the way he locked the man in the map and that would be his weakness. After saying that, she will use the prison activation. The girl stared at the map in horror at the thought of having to imprison the man. Mamoru said that the secateurs didn't know about her weakness, so she didn't have to worry about being imprisoned in the map. Mamoru asked the Yauka one more time and said that if they missed this opportunity, they would also miss her father's map. Yuka clutched the map in her hands and promised to try to do it. Riku and Mamoru were happy to hear that and smiled at her. Still, she wanted to know what to do in case things didn't go according to plan. They would have 2 cards in hand, Mamoru's and her father's, which was to be expected. Yuka had just registered on a human card site, but she hadn't even looked it up. Riku didn't know if it was magic or science, but it shouldn't have been forgotten that people turned into cards become a commodity, and that only meant that they could be taken out of there. Yuka looked at the black card on the table with interest and asked what it was. Mamoru replied that it was called Prison Access, and if you looked closely, you could see that the drawings on the cards were similar. Riku showed the girl his phone and said that they got them from the official website of Human Maps. After that incident, he and Mamoru were looking for any information. But on that site, if you wanted to know anything, you had to pay an entry fee, which made it difficult to gather information. If one paid a large amount of money, it was possible to get an answer. If the card they had in their hands couldn't be used in any way, then this creepy auction wouldn't make sense. Then it's unclear why they would be making these deals, since a piece of paper couldn't have such a price. Yuka began to guess at the answer they had found. Mamoru said that this is a prison access card and it's very easy to use it. It requires a card with a person locked in it, and if you inserted the card into the prison access, you could see the prisoner. At first, Yuka didn't understand anything, but then she screamed in surprise and stared at the card. Mamoru said that it was the same as with the ceiling, but how it worked was still unclear. With prison access, it was possible to get inside the map at any time, which meant that the owner of the card had complete dominance over his prisoner, and could do whatever he wanted. Riku confirmed his friend's words and admitted that it was something he didn't even want to think about. But it was like this kind of thing was in demand in this rotten world. But they had a different goal. They would take advantage of a privilege only available to the cardholder. Once sealed, there was no way a person could ever get out on their own. And that was the rule of human cards. But if one used prison access, the cardholder would have the key. In this way, it was possible to deactivate the prison. These words could break the shackles of the card and the prisoner would be set free. Yuka was happy to hear this and thought that this way they could get her father back. If they could see the locked people, it was possible to see her father and the others. She asked Mamoru where they were. Riku sadly looked away and apologized to Yuki, for they knew nothing else. They only had blank cards, so they couldn't check that. Besides, they still lacked information and Riku mentioned about the entry fee. They had no money left, because the more important the information, the more expensive its price. To get all the information they had, they spent 300,000 yen. They needed to pay a fee of 1,210,000 yen to continue viewing. The prison access itself cost them 2 million yen, and they spent all their savings. Yuka was shocked and thought the guys shouldn't be doing this, but Riku told the girl that they would earn more. Besides, they couldn't just pick up and leave her in the lurch. They were the closest of friends, closer than anyone else in this world. Mamoru supported his friend and said that they had overcome all difficulties together and nothing was different now. Besides, he believed that nothing would change in the future either. The guy picked up the phone and told the guys that everything would definitely go according to plan and they would bring Yuki's father back by all means. And they will do it with the 3 of them, just like they always do. The guys looked at Mamoru and smiled. The heroes went to a noisy street where Mamoru said he prepared an identifying red diplomat. The truth was that the inside was empty. The hero wanted to make sure everyone remembered their plan. There was no way they could reveal even the slightest bit of information about themselves to the secateurs. After all, in the world of human cards, information was the strongest weapon. If their identity was revealed, there was a danger that they would figure out their weakness. Mamoru said that he would go under his nickname Mikazuki. He also told Yuka that if the secateurs asked her name, it was better to use a fictitious one. The hero held out the prison cards to Riku and entrusted them to him. He figured it would be his responsibility to get it back from the cards. But then Riku suggested his plan to Mamoru. The guys were greatly surprised when Riku suggested that they switch places and fulfill the role of Mamoru. His friend was sure that the hero is more suited to give out instructions, and if he panics, the whole plan will be jeopardized. So Riku wanted to ask for permission to play his role and be the bait. Mamoru looked at Riku angrily and reminded him that this was not a game. Smiling, Riku grabbed the hero's shoulder and said he knew that. After learning a little about these cards, Riku seemed to understand his feelings. He didn't know how to describe it, but the human cards were truly evil. But Mamoru thought that wasn't enough. Besides, Riku should have realized how risky it was to get inside the map. And if the hero came up with the whole thing, he was the one who had to take the risk. Perhaps he shouldn't have said such a thing. He, father of Yuki, had caused her a lot of trouble. As a man, he was hopeless, but Mamoru didn't want Riku to do that for him. Riku grabbed Mamoru's clothes and the hero became silent. Riku asked him to stop. Even so, he is the only precious member of Yuki's family and he wanted to give him back to her. But to be quite frank, Riku wanted to be in the shoes of Yuki's protector if something went wrong. Mamoru decided not to argue with him and agreed. The hero only asked Riku to listen to him and finish everything in half an hour. If he suddenly started acting suspicious, they needed to forget about their plan and run. Their own lives came first and Mamoru hoped that Riku understood him. Riku smiled at his friend and said he understood him. So Mamoru found himself in the building across the street where he got himself a cup of tea and watched everything from the sidelines. The hero cursed his friend for suggesting that they switch places so suddenly. But in that instant, the hero noticed that Riku was serious. Yuki's father had been a serious and kind man in the past, but when he was downsized at work, he was consumed by gambling and fell into debt. But the troubles didn't end there. Yuki's mother, who was carrying the whole family on her back, died suddenly. So Yuka was left alone. She went to university, earned money from part-time jobs, and struggled to stay afloat. From the outside, Mamoru saw how well Riku and Yuka were getting along and he realized what was going on. The thing is that previously, Riku had also lost his parents in an accident as a child. He was taken in by his grandparents on his father's side. That's when he moved to their town, and that's probably why Riku understood Yuka like no one else. Riku has been evasive in changing the subject when talking about his parents since he was a child. The hero looked at the human cards that lay at his side. He still didn't know anything about those maps or this world. Surely there was something unfolding there ahead that was hard to imagine. However, Mamoru thought that he shouldn't have gotten even deeper into it. Mamoru was sure that today it would all end and he would forget about the world of human cards. Suddenly, the hero abruptly stood up from his chair and called out to Riku. He noticed the very human figure and notified the guys that he was already here. The stranger was wearing a dark suit and a green briefcase. There was no mistaking the secateurs. A man in a business suit noticed a couple of guys and headed in their direction. Mamoru told his friends that it was undoubtedly a pruning shears, and Riku turned to his friend. He notified Mamoru that they were starting their plan. Mamoru was worried about his friends and looked at Riku hopefully. The guy greeted the secateurs that approached them. Riku jumped in surprise when the serious man bowed down in front of him. He greeted the guy, smiled sweetly and asked him to call him secateurs. Riku tried to keep his cool and introduced himself with the name Mikazuki. Secateur squinted at the girl and assumed that she would be their escort. Riku confirmed this. In that case, the secateurs suggested they go to an establishment nearby. Secateur admitted that he had not expected that they would be so young and Riku wanted to know the reason. From the content of their letters, the secateurs figured they were much older, but the boys were apparently students. Riku apologized and admitted that he couldn't answer him. Surely the secateurs must have realized that and the man laughed. He agreed and asked to be understood correctly. Meanwhile, Mamoru was trying to hear their conversation. Because of the strong interference, the hero couldn't make out what they were talking about. But the fact that the secateurs were trying to reveal his identity was a good sign. It meant that he had no idea that he himself would be trapped in the map. Finally, they arrived at the place where they were to conduct the transaction. And before choosing a room, Riku offered him his number. Mamoru thought that everything was going according to their plan since it was the room they had chosen earlier. Everything was going smoothly according to the plan and Mamoru asked his friend to keep it up. Secateur along with the guys entered the room where Riku placed his suitcase on the floor. Secateur said it was a great room and Riku looked back at the girl who quickly went into the bathroom and latched the door behind her. The guy turned to secateurs and suggested they get it over with quickly. Riku held out his hand and motioned for the man to show his card first. The secateurs turned to the guy and gave him a horrified stare. He didn't mind, but there was something he needed to do before he did. He walked over to the shocked Rick and pulled his earpiece out of his ear. Yuka wanted to look out the door. As she opened the door, she froze in horror. The girl screamed and Riku rushed to her aid. Mamoru couldn't figure out what was wrong, as his earpiece was hissing terribly. The hero tried to call out to Riku, but all he heard was a crackling sound and the connection was cut off. A cleaver crushed the earpiece of the confused guy. The man offered to end this farce, for he already knew they didn't have the right cards. Besides, they both had earphones. The secateurs warned that an eye was needed on his opponent during the deal. He took Riku's imaginary frame from his hands and said he saw his weakness. Riku was covered with cold sweat from excitement and terror. Secateur asked him not to be surprised so much. It was just something he wanted to ask him. It was something very important, and his fate depended on that answer. Secateur wanted to know if Riku knew about Makoto Ren and Riku's face became even more frightened. Cicada assumed the guy didn't hear him and decided to repeat to him again about Makoto Ren. A flustered Riku said that he didn't know any such, but what was more interesting was how the Secateurs knew his name. Riku asked him to answer him what he did to his girlfriend that was with him. Cicada looked at Riku and realized that it wasn't him that should have been asked at all. He pulled out a map and held it out in front of him. Cicada said that he didn't need the Sakuma Riku now. Riku was shocked when the Secateurs told him about Riku's mother being suicidal. Everyone thought that his parents died in a car accident, but it was actually different. His mother stabbed his father multiple times after accusing him of cheating, and then killed herself by sticking a kitchen knife into his carotid artery. All this was in front of Riku, who was 3 years old. All the newspapers covered the incident, so Riku moved to another town. He tried to forget the past, and to this day he hid the truth. He hid the truth from everyone. He didn't even tell it to his best friends, Mamoru and Yuki. He was a boy that was connected to the murder. He was afraid that once they found out, they would cut all ties with him, even though they were the ones he could trust. They were his precious friends. Riku's tears flowed after the Secateurs' words, and the Secateurs pointed their card at the guy. He told Riku that this was his weakness. When Mamoru lost contact with his friends, he immediately rushed to the hotel, trying to figure out what happened there. It was only a blink of an eye, but he thought he heard Yuki screaming. The hero had already realized that the Secateurs had found their earpiece, but it was unclear what happened next. Mamoru tried to focus, but he couldn't. He ran as fast as he could and didn't realize how this could happen. With his last strength, Mamoru ran to the Love Hotel and looked at the time. If they were going according to plan, then Yuka should have been about to come out. Mamoru excitedly looked at the girl that reminded him of Yuka and called out to her. But it turned out to be a completely different woman with a boyfriend. Besides, she wasn't as pretty as Yuka. The woman covered her face with her hands and said that this young man's eyes were blazing like that. She was sure that Mamoru wanted to jump her, and her partner thought that there was nothing to be done about it, because Yumiko-san was a real beauty. The hero flew inside and tried to calm down. He decided that it was too early to think of anything bad, and maybe it was just a minor hiccup. If they still weren't done, they should still be in the room. But to his surprise, their room was already vacant. Mamoru thought that it just couldn't be and took the key number 501. He ran inside, but there was really no one in the room. The hero tried to call Riku, but the voice on the phone said that the subscriber's machine was turned off or was out of range. Mamoru ran out of the building and didn't understand what was even going on here. He assumed that something might have gone wrong during the transaction, and for some reason the guys weren't there. Mamoru kept telling himself that he didn't understand anything at all. Mamoru saw his friends and some of the passers-by, and mentally asked Yuka and Riku where they had gone. Mamoru hoped that they were all right, and he could not believe in something bad. Tears welled up in the boy's eyes. Eventually, he was so tired that he collapsed on the ground and tried to catch his breath. The hero noticed the police officers, but he didn't know what to say to them. He couldn't tell them that his friends had been turned into cards or something like that. Especially in the room, there were no traces left and he had no evidence. All the protagonist had was a correspondence with Secateurs about the deal. Mamoru suddenly remembered the correspondence and decided it was his clue. Mamoru thought that he could have just texted him and was shocked that he hadn't thought of it earlier. The mad hero wrote to the Secateurs that he was willing to fall to his knees and grovel for as long as it took. If it's about money, he's ready to collect all the money in the world and even agrees to get the cards he needs. To get Rika and Yuku back, he was willing to do anything. Having typed his message, the hero sent it. But at the last moment he got an error that prohibited him from writing to this user, as he had limited the number of people who could send him messages. Mamoru went into a real panic and tried to send him messages time after time, but all was to no avail. Out of helplessness, the hero fell to the ground again and screamed that it just couldn't be. Mamoru went back to his house and locked himself in his room. He was in a kind of prostration and stared at one point. Mamoru's hands went down. He didn't realize where he might have miscalculated. He tried to find some information on the Human Map website about the search for the maps. The map tracker was a feature that allowed you to track down any existing map. If you used it, you could track down Riku and Yuka, but any information on the site cost money. Of course, Mamoru had gotten into this deliberately, but the hero knew he couldn't handle it alone. Mamoru regretted letting Riku take his place and for dragging Yuka into all of this. The guy didn't understand how he could put his friends in danger and felt he should have acted alone. While the hero was absorbed in his thoughts, someone rang his doorbell. The bell was still ringing, and the hero slowly rose to his feet and proceeded to the door. It was the deliveryman who wanted to make sure that the guy's name was Mamoru. He handed him the letter and said it was an urgent delivery. The delivery man asked for a signature, after which he left. The hero stared gloomily at the envelope, but then his eyes rounded. On the back of the sender was the name of the pruner, and the guy opened the envelope in a hurry. The envelope contained the very same prison card, and Mamoru turned it the other side. It was a map of Sekuma Riku, which for some reason was crossed out with a large cross. Mamoru stared at his buddy Riku's map in horror. Mamoru didn't understand why this map had a red cross on it, plus it wasn't erasable. Stumbling from the speed, the hero ran to the room and started looking for the thing in the middle of his junk. He picked up another card and remembered that he could use the same thing. Mamoru asked Riku to wait a little longer and was about to unleash it, but for some reason he failed. On top of that, his eyes became blurry. The hero didn't realize what this feeling was, because everything around him was shrinking and warping. He tried not to chicken out and apologized to Riku and said that he was already on his way to save him. The boy opened his eyes and looked around. He picked up his map from the ground and got to his feet. It was quite dark all around, and Mamoru himself was in some sort of tunnel. The tunnel was quite deep and there seemed to be no end to it. Mamoru was terrified, not realizing where he was, because a moment ago he was in his room. The hero assumed it was her world inside the maps and proceeded inside the tunnel. Mamoru leaned against the wall and felt that it was quite cold. This was clearly not a virtual world, and everything here was real. He noticed that there was something up ahead and walked closer. Mamoru opened his mouth in surprise, not believing his eyes. Right in front of him was a huge grate that went all the way to the ceiling. There must have been a key to this grate, but there was no keyhole. Mamoru began to realize everything and used the deactivation of the prison. At the same moment, the lock clicked loudly and the doors of the huge grate opened. With bare feet, Mamoru carefully stepped inside. He noticed that the floor here was wet and there was a terrible odor. The hero didn't realize what this place was and heard dripping sounds nearby. Mamoru hoped that he would meet Riku here and called out for his friend. He walked deep inside where a dark figure was waiting for him inside. One day a young girl put on her shoes, pinned up her hair with an artificial bow tie, and told her mother she was leaving. The girl picked up a magazine and looked around questioningly. She thought the place was rather dreary as she stood at the bus stop. She remembered the words she had told her mother earlier. She had told her to quit it many, many times. The mother along with her daughter lived alone. The man who was supposed to be her father died in an accident without ever finding out that the mother was pregnant. Therefore, her mother gave birth to her without ever marrying her. Though the girl was already in high school, and to tell the truth, the fact that she didn't have a father didn't bother her in the least. But she wondered what he would think if he was with them now. The girls passing by saw a poster of Yui. A girl named Yui was on the cover of the November issue of NewUp. The girls were delighted and thought she was quite cute because she had something that other models didn't have. Her friends could understand the girl, for she was both cute and beautiful. They didn't understand how someone like her could exist in this world. Yui had rather large eyes and long legs. The girls thought that God was just unfair to them. One of the girls grabbed her head and screamed that she also wished she could be her. Her friends laughed and said she didn't think she could be, but the girl asked not to say that. This particular Yui was that girl. Her name was Kitagawa Yui and she was in high school and was also an adult. A year ago, she was called out when she was out with her friends and that was the beginning. It was an easy job at first, which she accepted with her mom's approval, but her work received a huge response. The work became more and more. It included shooting for magazines and speaking at events. She followed the call of new experiences and her life changed dramatically. But it also changed more than that. Walking into the restroom, the girl saw a mangled magazine with her face on it. She took out the magazine and it was noticed by a couple of girls. They thought it was a real horror, since she pulled it out of the trash can and was probably admiring her image now. They thought that Yui was too fond of admiring herself. They called Yui a narcissistic brat and asked her not to be conceited. The girls were disgusted at the thought that Yui liked to admire herself. A dark-haired girl from the group walked past Yui and threw her things on the floor. She asked about where Yui was going and warned that there was no room for her in the classroom. When Yui first started appearing in magazines, everyone was happy for her, or so she thought. But one day it turned into a boycott. Her belongings began to be hidden and her shoes and bag were cut into small pieces. Her gym uniforms were stuffed into the toilet and dead frogs were put in her bag and in her desk. The group responsible for this bullying, led by a Seiko girl, had a certain amount of power within the school and no one dared to stand up to them. When they bullied, the others pretended not to notice, and at some point, the whole school became Yui's enemy. The girl walked into a dark auditorium where there were chairs scattered around and horrifying writings towards Yui on them. She was now in the second grade of high school and only had a year left. Yui decided to overcome all of this and told herself that she would not run away. As she walked into the auditorium from behind, someone called out to her. It was the girl who was hiding her face behind a magazine with Yui's face on it and asked her to accept her congratulations. At first Yui didn't realize who it was, but then a slight smile appeared on her face. It was a girl with glasses named Nozomi. She laughed and greeted Yui. The girl approached Yui, said that as soon as she heard that her picture was on the cover, she immediately bought the magazine. Nozomi was delighted by Yui's beauty and admitted that her heart fluttered as soon as she met her eyes with her picture. In addition, Yui was able to talk to an actor named Shindo Yuki and she thought it was very cool. Yui looked at the joyful Nozomi with embarrassment. Nozomi was a classmate of hers who had started socializing with her after she had been bullied. She was the only one on her side, and Yui had no one but her. Nozomi said that Yui's desk wasn't in the classroom, so she came to look for her here. Yui's friend was furious that as soon as she did something cool, they would start bullying her. She offered to carry her desk back together, but Yui refused, and decided that her friend didn't understand, because she had been their target before, and if they noticed her next to Yui, they would probably bully her again. The girl pondered over Yui's words and recognized that there was nothing she could do about it. Nozomi hugged the magazine with Yui and smiled at her. She said that Yui wasn't guilty of anything. Yui covered her eyes and thought about the fact that Nozomi really didn't understand anything. In any case, they should have tried to socialize mostly outside of school. Yui suggested meeting after school, somewhere where no one would see them. Nozomi suggested that Yui come to the art class in the old building after school, where she would wait for her. Yui agreed with Nozomi, after which Yui left. After class, Yui went to the art classroom where they were to meet with Nozomi and opened the doors. In the middle of the classroom, Nozomi was sitting at an easel, and Yui assumed she was painting. The girl came closer to examine her painting and asked what she was painting. Nozomi smiled, but Yui was extremely surprised at her painting. It was the very same human cards. Nozomi asked her friend to listen. She wondered what Yui would do if she could take revenge on her abusers, but Yui didn't understand at all what she meant. Yui stood in front of Nozomi and asked her friend what she meant. What did she mean by getting back at them? Nozomi looked at Yui with an enigmatic smile but remained silent. The girl leisurely got up from her chair and said that she had to confess something to Yui. Nozomi took out a map from her pocket and showed it to Yui. It was the same human card, and Nozomi asked her friend to look at it. At first glance it was an unremarkable map, but it was actually special. Nozomi put the card on the table and decided to talk about its specialness. She also put a small wooden model of a person on the card and said that it was possible to lock a person in the card. Yui didn't understand anything and only listened to Nozomi indifferently. She assumed that it could be the plot of some popular anime. Her thoughts were interrupted by Nozomi, who called out to her friend. Nozomi thought that these cards were amazing. After all, someone she hated or someone who was in the way, everyone could be locked inside the card and get rid of them. Inside the card, you could also chain their hands and feet, drive a nail into every part of their body, and no one would even know about it. Nozomi twirled her wooden little model and told Yui that she could take revenge on each of them as she wished. Yui thought about Nozomi's words and immediately remembered the Seiko that was chief among her abusers. Nozomi lashed out at her friend and admitted that she couldn't stand to watch them bullying her anymore. She tried to explain that those cards were indeed real and she wasn't lying. With their help, Yui could really get revenge on them. Nozomi moved closer to Yui's ear and asked her to believe her. The girl froze in place and Nozomi asked her friend how she would act. But unfortunately for Nozomi, Yui wasn't going to do it. To be honest, she didn't even know whether to believe Nozomi, but it was conceivable that it was really possible. And even if it was, Yui didn't want to do it and apologized to her friend. Her answer surprised Nozomi, but the girl smiled and agreed with her. Still, Nozomi asked her to contact her immediately if Yui suddenly decided to do that. Then she could become her strength. After talking, the friends went to a cafe where they ordered some delicious drinks and had a good time. Yui suggested to go home since it was already quite late. Yui called out to her friend, but Nozomi stared at her hand with her watch. She frowned and said that this watch was kind of weird and didn't fit Yui's style at all. A cute watch would suit her better and Nozomi was sure of it. Yui laughed and recalled what she had said earlier. She said that she didn't know much about her father and there was almost nothing left of him, not even pictures. The only thing she kept from her father was this watch. It was a watch that he wore. Yui didn't wear it at all because she wished she had a father. She was just grateful to have a mother. The girl smiled and admitted that she wouldn't mind having proof of his existence. Late in the evening, Yui received a notice that she was called for filming. The girl thanked and said that if they took place over the weekend, she could make it. Yui collapsed on her bed and thought her head was spinning because of this strange conversation. Nozomi had always been weird to her. Yui thought about the human cards that Nozomi showed her. She decided that this just couldn't be happening and picked up her phone when she got the notification. It was Shindo Yuki again, who had been texting her incessantly. He was persistently begging for her mail, but there were rumors on the internet that he was gay. But Yui doubted it, because the guy offered to meet her, but this time in private. Yui threw the phone behind her and thought about him being a real womanizer. The next day, the group was discussing about Rick, who hadn't answered since yesterday. But someone said that he was answering her. The girls laughed and said she was definitely lying, because she couldn't have a boyfriend. The doors to the auditorium opened and all the girls immediately stopped laughing. They were not happy to see Yui here, but decided to continue their conversation. Yui noticed Nozomi looking in her direction. Earlier, Yui had asked Nozomi not to pay any attention to her. On the desk where Yui was supposed to sit there was a pile of trash again. The girl calmly picked up all that trash and threw it in the trash can. Another day had begun, just like all the previous ones. Yui decided that she only needed to hold out for one more year. It was only a year during which she couldn't break. On a run, the girl overtook one of the offending girls and was determined that there was no way she was going to lose to them. While jogging, she noticed Seika watching them from the sidelines. Seika was obviously up to something. After class, Yui changed in the locker room and buttoned her skirt. She fixed her hair and bent over to put on her stockings. With only one thing left to do, Yui picked up her father's watch. She was horrified when she saw that the watch was completely broken. Out of shock, Yui let go of the watch and it fell to the floor. As Seika and her group headed down the corridors, they were caught up by Yui. The angry girl called out to the Seiko and asked her how she dared to do that. The girl was furious that the Yui had called her by name and ordered the lowly trash to know her place. Seiko said that someone like her shouldn't be arrogant and there was no way she could become her equal in anything. She stared at Yui with resentment and threatened her that she would remind her where she belonged very soon. Yui remained silent and only glared at Seiko with hatred. After this incident, Yui came to the workshop where she was drawing Nozomi. She looked determined and called out to her friend. Nozomi already understood the reason why Yui was here and was happy about it. Yui couldn't say she believed her friend 100%, but she couldn't take it anymore. Today, the girls had crossed the line. Yui clutched the broken watch in her hands and said it was the one thing she couldn't forgive. Nozomi leaned against Yui and said it was okay, because the reason wasn't that important. She was just glad that Yui had decided to do this. Nozomi held out one of the cards to her friend and said she was giving it to her. Yui took the card with interest and turned it with the reverse side, which was completely black. It really did look like an ordinary card. Nozomi told her friend that if it was to be used, it would be on Seiko. She was the most powerful and number one within the school walls, but there was no number two. If the Seka disappeared, her gang would simply disintegrate as well. She had already told her yesterday that this card was special, and it was true that you could lock a person in it. The girl had to realize, as unbelievable as it sounded, whatever was going to happen next was going to be real. The world inside the map where there was a dimly lit tunnel, and deep in the darkness of the tunnel something was lurking. There was a secure locked cage, which was the prison. It was where people who were captured with the help of the map went, and once you get there, it is impossible to get out. It only meant that the Seka would end up behind those bars. It would be impossible to escape from there on one's own. Only the holder of the card, that is, Yui, would have the key to the cage. Therefore, Yui will be able to do whatever she wants with it. Just thinking like that made Nozomi excited. But in order to lock a person in the card, there was one very important condition. Yui looked at her friend interestedly, listening attentively to her further. Nozomi squeezed the wooden man with a smile and said that it was necessary to find out the weakness of her target. In order to use the card, one had to completely surrender the target's heart, otherwise the card wouldn't activate. Hearing that, Yui laughed and Nozomi looked at her friend in surprise. In the end, Yui decided that she couldn't use it since she didn't know Seiko's weakness. Besides, the girl doubted that Seiko had any weaknesses at all. But Nozomi had a different opinion and scattered a bunch of pictures in front of the surprised Yui. Nozomi smiled and exclaimed that there were a lot of them. Yui looked at the images and it made sense to her. Nozomi showed Yui the Seika's weak spot and waited for her response. Yui became uncomfortable with how Nozomi was getting all this information. Nozomi giggled and took a step towards Yui. She told her friend that if she was going to use human cards, it went without saying. She asked the girl if she was really ready for this. Now Yui would be able to expose Seika's weakness and subdue her heart. Nozomi walked up close to her friend and said that only the last words would remain to be spoken. Nozomi licked the card right in front of her friend's face and said that it would be necessary to activate the prison. From Yui's shocked look, Nozomi became amused. The phone that was lying on the desk beeped and Nozomi picked it up. Yui exclaimed that it was her phone, but Nozomi only smiled. The girl replied that she just didn't know Seiko's email, so she used Yui's contact list. Thus, she made her come here. While a group of girls were having fun with Seiko at the center, Seiko heard the notification and looked at her phone. She saw the incoming call from Kitagawa Yui and her face immediately twisted in a disgruntled grimace. Seiko told her girls that an urgent matter had come up and asked her to continue without her. The girls didn't want to let her go and reminded her that they were going to karaoke. To the girls' surprise, Seiko was furious and yelled to her friends that she had an emergency. Nozomi smiled at her friend and promised that Seiko would definitely come here. Wherever she was and whatever she was doing, she would definitely come. This was exactly what a person who had a weakness did. Not too long ago, Yui and Seiko were friends and went out together to pick out their outfits. Yui liked cute things like that, but Seiko only saw lame things. Yui didn't understand her friend and said that open back was in fashion this year. Seiko thought that Yui really didn't have a sense of style, but Yui exclaimed that it wasn't true. Fashion was changing too fast and a little time would pass and you couldn't wear something like that anymore. Seiko felt that it was impossible to ignore it, and it was really important to her. While they were choosing outfits, a young man approached them and apologized. He immediately made it clear to the wary girls that he didn't mean to offer them anything bad. Seiko was struck like lightning when she learned that the man was from a modeling agency. Seiko began to sweat with excitement and the thought that she might have been offered a job at a modeling agency. The man held out a business card to the girl and asked her to take it if she didn't mind. But Seiko didn't expect this business card to be handed out to Yui and not to her. Seiko stared at her friend in shock, who also didn't understand why she was chosen. Seiko kept remembering that moment and didn't understand why it wasn't her. After all, she thought she was much prettier and had a sense of style. She was so desperate to get into that world, but for some reason the talentless Yui was chosen. There was no way Seiko could accept that. When she received a message from the Yui, she immediately rushed to the intended location. Yui was already waiting for her in an empty abandoned classroom. Earlier, Nozomi had lastly supported her friend and asked her not to be afraid since she would be watching them from outside. She was sure that Yui would definitely be able to seal the Seiko. At some point, the doors opened abruptly and Seiko stared at Yui contemptuously. She was beyond angry, but the first thing she needed to do was to catch her breath. Seiko walked into the classroom and tried to find out what Yui was up to. In the message, Yui wrote to her that she knew her secret and if she didn't want the whole school to know about it, she had to come here immediately. It was a rather provocative message and Seiko thought that Yui was going to blackmail her. Seiko didn't even know that the girl was the type to resort to dirty methods and Yui covered her eyes. Yui couldn't stand it and exclaimed that she had no right to say that about her. She had previously tolerated all her bullying, but she would definitely not be able to forgive her for the watch. Seiko tried to remember what she was talking about, but Yui had already pulled out her human card and said she would seal it. Seiko lost her temper and yelled at Yui not to dare call her by her name, especially since she had already warned her about it. She asked her not to think about the fact that they were still girlfriends, and after all Yui needed to stop being a do-gooder. This annoyed Seiko the most, since Yui was nothing to her, and if Yui told her that she knew her secret, Seiko thought that was fine, and she accepted her challenge. Seiko asked to tell her secret, but she didn't think it would break her. She slandered Yui again, who silently showed her erotic lewd pictures. These pictures clearly showed Seiko in all the lewd poses where she was with men. Seiko stared shocked at the pictures and Yui said that it was her weakness. The thing is, the man in those pictures was the director of a modeling agency, and Seiko was his mistress. Seiko came to the agency on her own and most likely he told her that her relationship with him would allow her to reach the heights of her career, and she went to such lengths to achieve her goals. Seiko didn't expect this turn of events and wrapped her arms around herself. She lost her temper and fell to her knees. Seiko screamed that Yui turned out to be completely different and didn't understand how she was able to get those pictures. Looking at these pictures, Seiko cried and screamed at Yui that she was nasty. Yui tolerated all her insults and tried not to say anything to her. To make matters worse, Yui told Seiko that the whole school would find out and Seiko tried to figure out what Yui wanted from her. The girl resolutely pulled out her human card. Yui offered the desperate girl a deal where she had two conditions. The first was that she had to stop all bullying against her, and second, she had to break up with this principal, which Seiko was horrified by. There were many rumors about this agency and their director that even Yui had heard about. Many people had suffered at his hands. Sure, there were girls he let debut, but most were left with nothing. He even made some of them do the most obscene movies. Yui was sure that this would not lead Seiko to a bright future, so she wished Seiko would stop it. Yui thought that Seiko was a beautiful person. She was admired by everyone and followed by everyone, even her. Seiko didn't understand why someone like Yui would say such a thing. Through her tears, Seiko pounced on Yui and threw her to the floor. In surprise, Yui dropped the card she was holding. Seiko asked her not to think about making a deal with Yui. She wanted to take pictures of her naked and distribute those pictures to everyone. Yui asked her to let go and stop, because she was in pain. Seiko felt that Yui didn't understand her at all because she hadn't put any effort into her career. Seiko was going to make her debut for sure. After all, she was much better than Yui. Yui couldn't resist Seiko. Desperate, she screamed and applied the prison activation. The map that was lying on the floor glowed with a bright light. Yui screamed and used the prison card and the card glowed. Seiko didn't realize what was happening, but for some reason her body started to be pulled somewhere. Right in front of the shocked Yui's eyes, Seiko began to dissolve. From the horror of what was happening, Yui covered her mouth with her hands. Seiko screamed and asked Yui for help. Yui reached out to her former friend, but the card sealed the Seiko inside her. The card stopped glowing and fell to the floor again. Yui stared at the card fearfully. After recovering a bit, the girl crawled on her knees to the card and grabbed it in her hands. Turning the map face up, Yui covered her mouth in horror. She couldn't believe her eyes. The map displayed all the information about Seika as well as her picture. Yui was convinced that it was all true and didn't know what to do now. The girl looked at the image of Seiko in shock and kept saying her name. Yui didn't even notice when Nozomi came up behind her and giggled. She was curious to look at the map of the Seiko. Yui stared at her friend, who laughed lightly and told Yui that she did well. Nozomi picked up the Seki map and laughed as she remembered Seki's face the moment the map started to consume her. You wouldn't be able to tell at first glance, but her card was quite weighty. Nozomi thought that it might have suited her, even though she wasn't really interested in Seiko. Nozomi blushed and said it was a charming card. But right now, that card belonged to Yui. Nozomi took out her notebook and put the Seki card in it, then slammed it shut. The girl told Yui that they got rid of the instigator and must be now. Seiko was behind bars and shaking with fear. Even at that thought, Nozomi couldn't contain her laughter. Nozomi said that this was her end. While Seiko was inside the card, she was defenseless and now belonged to Yui. That was all the power of human cards. Nozomi told her friend that it was time for fun and suggested starting with a light punishment. Yui recovered a bit and asked Nozomi why she was laughing. Nozomi stared at Yui in surprise. Yui admitted that she couldn't bear the guilt and couldn't believe that Nozomi didn't feel the same way. The girl cried and couldn't believe it would turn out like this. Yui screamed that she didn't need that kind of revenge and asked Nozomi to bring back Seika. Nozomi, completely shocked and confused Yui, whom she kissed right on the lips. Nozomi fell her surprised friend to the floor and dropped the map pad. She put her hand on Yui's chest and admitted that that's what she liked about her. Nozomi reached her hands towards Yui's skirt, but the girl asked her to stop and stop. But her friend wasn't going to listen to her and slipped her hand into Yui's panties. Yui blushed and twitched when Nozomi told her that she was so pure and innocent. Nozomi touched her tongue to the girl's breasts and asked her to show her the expression that could have been on Yui's face. Yui tried to resist her friend and asked her to stop. At some point she couldn't stand it and pushed the Nozomi aside. The girl touched her friend's black notebook from which many human cards sprinkled out. Yui was shocked by so many cards. Yui stared at the floor and noticed a familiar face in the cards. It was Shindo Yuki's prison card. Yui stared at the Shindo Yuki map in surprise and couldn't believe her eyes. Nozomi smiled and picked up her glasses from the floor. She walked over to Yui and said that she was absolutely right. All of these were her human favorite cards, and one of those cards was the Shindo Yuki she had gotten about a month ago. But Nozomi admitted that she hadn't summoned that card herself. She bought his card at an auction, which shocked Yui at all. She had never heard of an auction before. Yui remembered that she had seen it about a month ago, and then apparently it had been turned into a map. But Yui didn't understand how he could have been writing to her all this time. Nozomi put her notebook away and told Yui that she knew everything about her, and even about her meeting with Shindo Yuki. She knew about it long before it was written about in the magazine. Nozomi was worried about her friend, because Shindo Yuki was a terrible womanizer, and she was afraid that he would do something to Yui. So when she accidentally came across his name at an auction, she was very grateful for it. Nozomi showed a joint photo of Yui and Shindo Yuki, saying that he was disgusting to her. It was an interview photo and Yui started to guess what the phone was. Mad Nozomi licked the phone and admitted that she couldn't forgive him for trying to get close to her, so she decided to check it out. Thus, all the messages that were sent to Yui on Yuki's behalf were from Nozomi. She always wanted to see how Yui would react to an invitation from a famous actor, but she never once responded to him, which made Nozomi thrilled. Nozomi tossed the phone aside and told Yui that she was amazing and totally unsuitable for him. Therefore, Yui belonged only to her. Nozomi couldn't contain her feelings and confessed her love to her friend. She wanted to hug her to the point of madness and not let her go. She wanted to get all of Yui for herself. Nozomi began to slowly crawl up to the frightened Yui and said that she had always looked only at her and knew everything about her. Yui had a cute face and beautiful eyes. She was beautiful not only on the outside but also on the inside. Yui seemed completely innocent. Nozomi was surprised by her strength and that even bullying didn't break her, and was pure and kind. Nozomi thought that Yui would agree with her and touched her cheek. She saw that Yui didn't have any weakness. Therefore, she herself became her weakness. Yui did not understand Nozomi at all and asked what it meant. Nozomi was mysteriously silent and Yui asked her to answer. There was one thing that Nozomi forgot to tell her about the human cards. She took one card in her hand and continued. She hid half her face behind the card and answered that no one was supposed to see the moment she sealed someone in the card. And the fact was that for the world of human cards, this was the strongest weakness. Yui jumped to her feet and tried to run away, but Nozomi stopped her. She yanked the girl's arm and Yui fell to the floor. Nozomi knew that if she broke her watch, Yui would hate the girls even more. She knew that in that case, Yui would definitely get interested in human cards and use their power. Nozomi smiled at Yui and said that she saw the way she sealed Siko in the card. And now Nozomi knew Yui's weakness. Yui cried and asked Nozomi not to do that. The friend looked at her adored and beloved Yui and repeated that she wanted her. Nozomi promised to always be there for her and protect her. Lastly, she asked Yui not to be afraid and the girl looked at her friend in fear. Nozomi showed the girl the map and said with a smile that they would continue where they left off on the other side. Nozomi pulled the map in front of her and activated the prison on the Yui.